my parents took me to court for buying a house without their blessing. They called it betrayal of blood. No joke. The envelope was thick, legal paper thick. It had that weighted texture and off-white color that said someone paid money to make this feel important. Thessaly Crane stood motionless on the steps of her duplex in South Minneapolis, one hand still gripping the open mailbox, the other holding the envelope like it might explode. Her name was printed in all caps across the front, no Ms. or Miss. Just Thessaly M. Crane, formal and sterile. The return address was a law office in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That was all it took for her breath to catch in her throat. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she walked back inside with the envelope pressed to her chest, her pulse thudding hard beneath it. The late October air clung to her skin even as she closed the door behind her. The little house was quiet, sparsely furnished. A second-hand bookshelf, a folding table masquerading as a desk, paint swatches still taped to the walls. This was her house. Finally. Thessaly set the envelope down on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached for a paring knife, slid the blade under the flap, and opened it with clinical precision like she was dissecting a memory she didn't want to relive. She pulled out the papers. And there it was. A civil suit, filed by her parents, Jonathan and Miriam Crane, for unjust enrichment constructive trust, and a phrase that punched her harder than anything misappropriation of generational assets. She read it 3 times. The language was thick with legalese, but the message was clear. They were accusing her of stealing from the family. Not money, not property exactly, something vaguer, more insidious. The life she had built after escaping them. According to this filing, it belonged to all of them. She dropped the papers on the counter and took a shaky breath. 12 years! That's how long it had been since she left home. 12 years of silence, of missed holidays, unanswered calls, unopened birthday cards. Not because she hated them, not even really because she was angry, but because it was the only way to survive. And now, just when she thought she had finally built something they couldn't touch, they had found a way to reach her. Thessaly Crane, 33 years old, financial consultant, quiet, disciplined. The kind of woman who remembered which days the trash went out and which weeks were double coupon days at the grocery store. She hadn't always been that way, but necessity had turned her meticulous. After all, when you have no backup plan, precision becomes a way of life. She walked to the small window over the sink and stared out at the street. Late fall sun lit up the maple trees like a fire winding down. A jogger passed. Somewhere in the distance a leaf blower whined. Normal life continued unaware that the past had just reached up and wrapped a hand around her throat. She turned away from the window and went to the hall closet. From the top shelf, she pulled down a file box labeled Documents, Keep Forever. It was heavy, dense, with over a decade of tax returns, pay stubs, utility bills, student loan statements, and meticulously saved bank records. Because she knew this might happen. Not the lawsuit exactly, but the reach. The reach of her family, the way they believed that control once granted could never be revoked. That money they didn't earn could still be owed to them. That freedom could somehow be framed as betrayal. She sat at the table and opened the box. There was the ledger she kept from age 21 to 27. Not digital handwritten in pen, each line item logged like scripture. Rent, ramen, bus fare. Her first laptop bought refurbished from a pawn shop. Every dollar accounted for, every cent stretched to its limit. She flipped to the page that marked her first month in Minneapolis. There, in cramped block letters, she had written, Goal, 350 $2,000 by age 32. House. No cosigner. No strings. No one else's name on the deed. She had reached that goal last month, bought the house in cash. After over a decade of skipped holidays, second jobs, and thrift store clothes, she had earned something permanent, and now they were trying to take it. Not by breaking in or seizing a bank account, but by using the one weapon they had always wielded, best guilt dressed up in moral duty. Legalized manipulation. She remembered the last time she spoke to her mother. It was over a decade ago. Her mother had called to say that Camden, her younger brother, needed help with college loans, that Thessaly had extra money from her job and should send a portion of her paycheck back to the Crane family fund like everyone else. Thessaly had laughed quietly before saying, "No, I'm not part of that anymore." Her mother had replied with 3 chilling words, "You'll regret this." Apparently, this was what regret looked like. She read the court filing again. A line near the bottom stopped her. The defendant's financial independence was made possible only through the benefit of early Crane family systems, resources, and values. Thessaly laughed once, bitter and low. Of course they were trying to claim credit for the very independence they had fought so hard to suppress. She looked around her house, still half unpacked, still in progress. But it was hers, and she wasn't about to lose it. She reached for her phone and opened her contacts. She hadn't needed a lawyer in years, but this called for someone sharp. Someone who wouldn't flinch at a case built on emotional coercion dressed up in legal doctrine. She found the number of a legal clinic she'd bookmarked 6 months ago when researching local estate laws. She had no estate yet, but she always planned ahead. As the phone rang, she whispered to herself, "This isn't about the money." It never was, and she was right. This was about ownership, about who got to claim her story and who didn't. Before Thessaly could fully process the legal ambush that had just detonated across her kitchen table, the past came crawling up from the floorboards, not in flashbacks exactly, but in fragments, in embedded instincts, in rules she hadn't realized she still lived by. Don't speak unless you have the numbers to back it up. Don't ask where the money goes. Don't keep secrets unless it's to protect the family's image. Always contribute. Always defer. Always owe. That was the Crane doctrine. Her parents never called it that, of course. It was just how things worked in their household. From the outside, the Crane family of Cedar Falls, Iowa looked pristine tall hedges, pale blue shutters, a manicured lawn mowed in alternating diagonals. Jonathan and Miriam Crane held respected positions in the community. He was a tax consultant. She ran the church bookkeeping committee. Camden, their golden son, had the smile of a politician and the effortless charm of someone never told no. Thessaly, 2 years older and infinitely quieter, was the one with the spreadsheets. Even as a kid, she could sense it how her competence made people uncomfortable, especially when it wasn't accompanied by compliance. The first time she heard the term family fund, she was 10. Her mother had drawn it on a piece of lined paper, a simple circle in the center of 4 arrows labeled Dad, Mom, Thessaly, and Camden. She explained that every family member gave what they could, and in return, they all had what they needed. It sounded fair, until she realized she never saw where the money went. Her allowance, $5 a week, was given in cash and taken back in ledgers. She had to fill out a form detailing how she planned to spend it. Candy from the corner store, denied. School supplies her teacher hadn't listed, questioned. When she bought a $3 notebook with her own money at age 12, her father took it and returned it, saying she had broken spending protocol. By high school, the control had only deepened. Thessaly got her first job at 16 cashiering at the town pharmacy. Her paychecks were direct deposited into a shared savings account that bore her name, but not her authority. Her mother reviewed every transaction. Any deviation a sandwich after work, a digital music download was met with lectures about leakage and selfishness. Camden, on the other hand, got a used car when he turned 17. Thessaly got a bus schedule taped to the fridge. She didn't complain. She kept records. College should have been her escape, but they tried to clip her wings before she even left the nest. Her top choice was a public university in Michigan with a generous scholarship package. Her parents pushed her toward community college, citing lower costs and the chance to remain in the fold. When she pushed back, her mother said, "You don't need to go far to grow. Your roots are here." She left anyway, quietly, with a partial scholarship and a $1,000 check from a distant great-aunt who believed in her. She moved into a dorm 2 states away and opened her first truly private bank account. A week later, she found out her parents had used her Social Security number to open a credit card under her name. Just to help establish credit, they said when she confronted them. The balance was already over $800. That was the breaking point. Thessaly packed a bag, changed her phone number, and started over. She picked up 2 part-time jobs on top of her classes and rented a basement room off campus. For the next 4 years, she studied and worked and paid off a debt she never consented to. No holidays, no visits, no forwarded mail. Just long hours, a battered laptop, and a voice in her head repeating, "Don't give them anything else to take." Her degree in finance didn't come from a private college, but it taught her what she needed: how money works, how people hide it, and how to protect it. By 25, she had finished paying off the student loans she took on after her parents refused to fill out her FAFSA forms. By 26, she had learned how to invest modestly. By 30, she had a freelance side business doing budgeting plans for women leaving financially abusive relationships. She never spoke about her family, not because she was hiding something, but because she wasn't sure how to explain the kind of theft that didn't involve locks or stolen goods, just expectations. The Crane Doctrine wasn't written in law books or filed with the IRS. It lived in dinner table conversations and sermons about gratitude. It lived in side eyes when she didn't tithe. In the way Camden once said after his 3rd job loss, "I just assumed you'd always have something saved." To them, her competence wasn't a boundary, it was a resource, something they could rely on without asking, something they believed deep down they had planted, and now they were trying to take her house, not for its market value, not even for spite, but because they truly believed it was theirs. Thessaly closed the file box and sat quietly at her small dining table, the lawsuit papers still fanned out beside her. Her heart wasn't pounding anymore. Not with fear. Something colder had taken its place: clarity. She thought back to the last page of the legal documents where her parents' attorney argued that she had benefited from Crane family systems discipline and financial philosophy. They were trying to argue that her success was proof of her debt. But Thessaly knew the truth. Their system hadn't built her, it had tried to break her. And somehow that truth was going to have to be said out loud in court under oath. She stood up and looked out the window again. Fall was fading. Winter was coming. And she wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. The worst part wasn't the credit card. It was the calm in her mother's voice when Thessaly confronted her. "It's just a small card," Thess Miriam Crane had said, sounding almost annoyed. "We were helping your credit. You'll thank us someday." Thessaly didn't thank them. She hung up the phone and stared at the wall of her tiny dorm room until the sunlight shifted from amber to gray. There was a knock at the door, her roommate inviting her to dinner, but she didn't move. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from something heavier, betrayal that had hardened into resolve. That night, she made a decision. No fanfare, no screaming match, no goodbye letter taped to the fridge. She would leave them the same way she had lived under them, quietly, efficiently, without giving them a single thing they could twist into guilt. The next morning, Thessaly moved her remaining funds out of the joint emergency account her parents still had access to. She packed everything she owned into a single duffel bag, withdrew $140 in cash from the campus ATM, and caught a Greyhound bus to Minneapolis. She had never been to Minnesota. She picked it because she knew no one there, and that felt like freedom. She found a room in a shared basement unit, bare concrete walls, one narrow window, and a door that jammed when it rained. Rent was $375 a month if she paid cash on time. Utilities included heat spotty. She didn't mind. At the university, she filed paperwork to be considered financially independent. It took months and pages of documentation, but eventually she was free of parental signature requirements. She took on extra coursework plus a 3rd shift cleaning offices at night. Her hands cracked from winter dryness, her hair thinned from stress. Still, she stayed. She built her life one invoice at a time, tutoring high school students in math, taking summer jobs, entering financial data for a food co-op, even designing simple spreadsheets for small nonprofits that couldn't afford QuickBooks. The goal wasn't luxury, it was control. In her 2nd year, she started a habit that would define her for the next decade. Every Sunday night, she'd sit at her rickety thrift store desk with a cup of instant coffee and a mechanical pencil, reviewing every dollar that had passed through her hands that week. She tracked each expense with the same rigor her mother once demanded, only now the judgment was hers. Bus fare $21. Oatmeal bulk bin $13.40. Used coat from Goodwill $7.99. Saved $92.60. It became her ritual, her faith, her resistance. She didn't talk about her family. When new friends asked where she was from, she'd say Iowa and change the subject. When professors suggested she apply for parent-based aid or talk to alumni relatives, she'd smile and say she was all set. People assumed she was fiercely private. In truth, she was just trying not to unravel. Camden emailed once. Just a single line. "Hope you're safe. I told them to leave you alone." She never replied, because she didn't believe it. They hadn't left her alone. Even in silence, their expectations lingered. Every time she saw a Mother's Day sale or a Father's Day card rack, she felt the quiet press of obligation. But she didn't call. She didn't write. She couldn't risk the door cracking open again. After graduation, she found a job entry-level assistant at a financial planning firm. The pay was barely livable, but she'd long since trained herself to do more with less. She kept her expenses brutally low. Shared housing, prepaid flip phone. Walked when she could, took buses when she couldn't. She bought nothing unless it had 3 purposes or 3 years of use. Her coworkers thought she was quirky, frugal, minimalist. They didn't know she still carried the weight of a family doctrine that said, "Your value is what you give back and your freedom is selfishness." Each year, she earned a little more, got promoted, took on side clients. Bit by bit, the savings grew, and still she never checked the balance. That was the rule. The moment she saw the number, she feared she might feel tempted. Relax, let her guard down, and she couldn't afford that, not until it was enough. What enough meant changed over the years. At first, it was just being able to pay rent without skipping meals. Then, it became having 6 months emergency funds. Later, it was about truly owning something without a cosigner or a backup plan. That something she decided would be a house, not because she needed the space, but because a house was land, title, name on a deed, proof that she existed outside the family ledger. So, she kept going. Every check, every bonus, every dollar from freelance budgeting gigs went into her high-interest account. She did her own taxes, maxed out retirement accounts, ignored every impulse that didn't directly support her escape plan. She gave up dating, gave up holidays, gave up rest. And when friends gently asked why she was always busy, always tired, she'd shrug and say, "I've got a goal." She didn't say what it was. She didn't say who it was about. But every budget she drew, every cost she avoided, every Sunday night ledger, those were her letters to herself. Her silent rebellion. Her escape plan. The world called it discipline. She knew it was armor. 12 years later, she was still wearing it. Even in her own home. Even after the mortgage papers had been signed and the keys placed in her hand. And now the very people who forced her to build her life in secret were trying to lay claim to it. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. Because if they could twist her story into something owed, something taken, then all those years might not count for anything at all. By the time Thessaly turned 24, she'd stopped wondering if her parents ever thought about her. She assumed they did. Miriam never let go of anything, but she couldn't afford to carry that weight anymore. It was enough just trying to survive. She'd fallen into a rhythm so strict it became invisible. Each morning started before sunrise. Instant coffee, dry toast, and a mental checklist of what had to be done, what had to be avoided, and where she could save another few cents. She took the early bus to the office because it was cheaper and less crowded. After work, she headed straight to her freelance clients or picked up a data entry shift at a local clinic. She lived in a series of small rooms. First, a windowless basement with 2 roommates and a shower that only ran hot water for 90 seconds. Then, a 1-bedroom above a nail salon that smelled perpetually of acetone and jasmine tea. Every move was calculated closer to work, closer to a decent bus line, cheaper utilities. At one point, she lived in a converted garage with a portable heater that wheezed all night like an asthmatic child. Still, she stayed on course. Thessaly's meals were functional. Oats, beans, discount produce nearing expiration. Once a month, she allowed herself one small indulgence, a single takeout meal under $10 eaten slowly on a Sunday evening while she reviewed her budget. That became her version of reward, something to look forward to that wouldn't derail her timeline. She didn't own a TV. She had a second-hand laptop with missing keys and a stubborn hinge, but it still ran Excel. That was enough. For a while, the silence of her life was comforting. No emotional ambushes, no cold lectures, no passive-aggressive budget meetings with her mother that masqueraded as support. Just her spreadsheet, and the next milestone. And she hit them one by one. At 25, she paid off the last of the credit card debt her parents had created in her name. At 26, she reached her first emergency savings target. At 27, she refinanced her student loans under her own name, no cosigner, no family involvement. The number in her savings account started to resemble something real, something powerful, but she never let herself get too close. She refused to check the total more than once a year. Everything else lived inside her formula's income and expenses outmargins saved. Her friends admired her, but they didn't understand. They saw her as intensely focused minimalist, even inspirational. They joked about Thessaly being the kind of person who would retire at 40, sipping tea in a paid-off house while everyone else drowned in debt. But to her, it never felt admirable. It felt like survival. And she could never quite shake the feeling that she had to stay invisible. Like if she lived too loudly, spent too boldly, or stood out too brightly, they might find her. Her family. Not physically. Not in the way of surprise visits or unexpected phone calls. But in that more insidious way through legacy obligation, some unspoken cord that insisted, "You are still ours." At 28, Thessaly finally allowed herself a small upgrade. She moved into a tiny studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Rent was $775, still below the city average. She bought a better space heater. She framed a single photo, an image of the North Shore cliffs taken during a rare weekend trip with Alicia, her closest friend. She hung it by her desk as a reminder she was allowed to want beauty. By 30, she was managing a team of junior analysts at her firm and bringing in steady freelance income on the side. She opened a second savings account, this one labeled Simply Home. She didn't touch it. She didn't even set a target number. But every spare dollar she had, she deposited. Sometimes she wondered what her parents would say if they saw her now. Not that she wanted them to, but she'd imagined it during long commutes or late-night bus rides when she was too tired to distract herself with anything else. Would her father scoff at how long it had taken her to get somewhere? Would her mother still insist that budgeting was only valid if someone else reviewed it first? Would Perfect Camden call her lucky and mean it like an insult? The thing that bothered her most was knowing they'd never ask how she'd done it. They'd never want to hear about the ramen years, the panic attacks, the missed dentist appointments, or the quiet loneliness of walking home from a grocery store in sub-zero wind because Uber was out of the budget. They wouldn't ask because they didn't want her story. They wanted credit for it. That thought kept her up some nights more than she'd like to admit. She'd stare at the ceiling of her studio, her breath fogging slightly in the winter air, and think about how many hours she'd traded for the illusion of safety. And yet, she never considered stopping. Each year, she added more to her knowledge base, took free online classes in real estate law, tax optimization, tenant rights. She did mock walkthroughs of houses on weekends just to learn the right questions to ask. She kept a spreadsheet of market trends in different neighborhoods around the city. She wasn't just saving for a house. She was preparing to defend it. At 32, the final big shift happened. She was offered a project director role at a new firm, higher pay, better benefits, flexible hours. It was more than she ever thought she'd reach before 40. She accepted. That night, she opened her savings account and, against all her rules, looked at the number. Her breath caught. 413, 672, 89s. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even smile. She just stared at the digits until they stopped swimming. It wasn't the money itself. It was what it meant. No one else's name was on it. No shared accounts, no oversight, no fund that had to be approved by anyone named Crane. This was hers. All of it. A week later, she began looking at houses. She had 2 rules: modest square footage, no major repairs. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted something that would last. Something solid. something that whispered, not screamed, that she had arrived. She spent weekends touring listings, learned what structural integrity looked like, learned how to ignore paint colors and focus on plumbing. And then, one quiet morning in early September, she found it. A pale, gray, two-bedroom cottage with a cracked driveway, a crooked porch swing, and the kind of warmth that doesn't photograph well but lives in the bones of a place. It wasn't perfect, but neither was she. It was within her range. She made an offer, and for the first time in her adult life, someone said, yes, no conditions, no demands, no judgment. Just yes. The first time Thessaly stood alone inside the house, the silence startled her. Not the kind of silence that meant absence or cold. This was a different kind, of fullness, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting for her to arrive. It smelled faintly of dust and wood polish, the kind of scent that lingers in homes that haven't been lived in for a while. The previous owner had passed away 2 years prior. The agent said the family had debated selling until recently. Thessaly walked from room to room, her steps quiet against the worn hardwood floors. The living room windows were large and square, letting in soft northern light. The kitchen was dated but clean, with cheerful blue tile and a stove that reminded her of her college rental, functional, not flashy. She didn't care about granite countertops or open-concept anything. She wanted plumbing that worked, a roof that wouldn't leak for at least 10 years, and walls that didn't hide mold. And here it was nothing fancy, nothing fragile. Just enough. Jessica Taylor, the real estate agent, had warned her not to rush. "You've got options," she said during their first meeting. "Most people come to me with champagne dreams and beer budgets. You're the opposite. You've got a solid budget but modest expectations. That's rare." Thessaly appreciated her directness. Jessica was in her 40s, sharp but kind, with no time for pretense. She'd guided Thessaly through the process with a firm hand and a dry sense of humor. "Don't fall for charm," she said more than once. "Fall for solid wiring and a decent foundation." When Thessaly had found the listing, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, small fenced yard, walkable to the light rail, she hadn't expected to feel anything. But as she stepped into the back room, a sunlit space with creaky floorboards and peeling paint, she felt it. Something click. She could see where the bookshelves would go, where her desk might sit. A tiny home office with a view of the maple tree out back. "I want this one," she told Jessica, even before they'd seen the basement. "This one feels right." They made an offer the next morning. The seller countered slightly higher. Thessaly agreed without hesitation. She had done the math already. Even with closing costs and a small repair buffer, she would stay within the number she'd kept sacred for 12 years. The mortgage process was faster than she expected. No red flags, no delays. Her credit score was pristine, her down payment massive. Every banker, inspector, and underwriter along the way repeated the same phrase. "You're in a very strong position." It felt foreign, like they were talking about someone else, someone less tired, less guarded. On closing day, she sat at a conference table in a bland office building downtown, flanked by folders and a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The seller wasn't present, just a notary, the title officer, and Jessica, who sat beside her with an approving nod. The stack of documents was thick. Thessaly signed each one with calm precision. She had read every word the night before, highlighting phrases, flagging footnotes. She was prepared. Still, when the final signature was done and the title officer handed her a small manila envelope with 2 keys inside, something in her chest gave way. "Congratulations, homeowner," Jessica said with a quiet smile. "You did it!" Thessaly didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply nodded, tucking the envelope into her coat pocket like it was something breakable. That evening, she drove across town with the windows cracked, letting the fall air fill the car. She didn't bring anything but an overnight bag, a flashlight, and a small bottle of champagne she had bought on clearance 6 months earlier and saved for someday. This was it. The house looked different at night, quieter, still. The porch light flickered slightly, and she made a mental note to check the wiring. Inside, the air smelled cooler than it had in daylight. She turned on a single lamp and stood in the living room holding the keys in her hand like they might disappear. She unrolled a yoga mat on the hardwood floor and set down the champagne. There was no furniture yet, not even a chair. She sat cross-legged, popped the cork, and poured the fizzy liquid into a ceramic mug from her overnight bag. She took one sip, then another. Then she laughed softly, unexpectedly. The sound startled her. She hadn't heard her own laugh in weeks, maybe months. That night, she slept on the yoga mat with a folded sweatshirt as a pillow. The floor was hard and the house groaned once or twice with shifting temperature, but she didn't mind. She felt safe. Not the kind of safety that comes from alarm systems or double locks. The kind that comes from knowing no one else could take this from her. No co-signers, no shared deeds, no family fund oversight. Just her name inked in official font, printed on a title and recorded in the county system. The next morning, she walked to the corner store for cleaning supplies. Sponges, vinegar, a mop. She scrubbed every surface herself, humming softly as she wiped down cabinets and opened windows. The work didn't feel like a chore. It felt like introduction, like the house needed to know her. Later, she called Alicia. "You're really in, Alicia," said her voice warm with disbelief. "Like legally. Fully. No strings." "No strings," Thessaly replied, her fingers tracing the edge of the doorframe. "Just me. I hope you're celebrating properly." "I drank discount champagne on the floor. You always did party like a banker." Thessaly smiled. Alicia had been one of the few constants in her life over the years, never prying, always supportive. The kind of friend who understood silence and respected boundaries. "I'm proud of you," Alicia said. "Most people talk about freedom. You actually built it." As she hung up, Thessaly felt it again, that quiet fullness. Like the house had settled just a little more around her, acknowledging its new owner. She stood in the middle of the living room, hands on her hips, and looked around. The walls needed fresh paint. The porch swing needed repair. The basement smelled faintly of mildew. There was work to be done, but it was hers. And for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't building something in secret. She was finally building something real. In the days that followed, Thessaly moved with purpose. She unpacked her limited possessions, carefully labeled boxes of books, one cast iron pan, a thrifted French press, 3 plant cuttings nurtured for years on the sill of her old apartment window. She arranged them slowly, deliberately, like placing punctuation at the end of a long sentence. It wasn't just about building a home, it was about trusting she could. By the end of the second week, she had painted the kitchen walls a warm eggshell color, replaced the porch light herself, and made a list of contractors for future projects. Her evenings were spent cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through design blogs and sipping tea. For the first time in years, she let her mind wander into the future, not in spreadsheets or contingencies, but in color schemes and curtain lengths. She should have left it there, in peace, in closure. But something lingered. It started with Alicia's question over dinner one Friday. "Are you going to tell them?" Them needed no explanation. Thessaly stared down at her plate. "I don't know." "You don't owe them anything," Alicia said gently. "I know." She paused. "But a part of me hoped when I reached this point that maybe it would mean something, that maybe they'd see it wasn't rebellion, just survival." Alicia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Later that night, as the streetlight outside cast pale ribbons across her bedroom floor, Thessaly sat at her desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than she expected. It had been 12 years since she last initiated contact. When she finally began to type, she kept it short. "Hi, Mom and Dad. I hope you're both well. I wanted to share some personal news. I recently purchased a home here in Minneapolis. It's modest, but mine. I've attached a photo. If you'd ever like to reconnect, the door is open. Take care, Thessaly." She reread it twice. It was neutral, measured. No emotion her mother could weaponize, no loophole her father could dissect. Just a message. A single thread offered quietly. She hesitated, then clicked send. To Camden, she wrote separately. "Camden, I bought a house. Took me longer than I thought, but it's done. I'm not looking to drag the past back up, but I figured you should hear it from me. If you ever want to talk, I'm around." Thess. His reply came 3 days later. The name lit up her phone screen as she stood in line at the hardware store. She stepped outside to answer. "Hey," she said. There was a pause. Tess. She hadn't heard that nickname in over a decade. It landed soft and strange in her ear. "Yeah. It's me." Camden exhaled the sound sharp in her ear. I wasn't sure if you'd actually reach out. I wasn't either. You really bought a house, I did." "Cash." "Yes." He gave a low whistle. "Damn." She said nothing. "I mean, that's incredible," he added quickly. "I'm happy for you." Thessaly's chest tightened. The words were so unexpected they almost sounded sincere. "Thanks." There was a pause. "Listen," he said. "Mom and Dad. I don't know how they'll react. I haven't shown them your email yet. I wanted to talk to you first." That stopped her cold. "You're still living there." "No, but we talk. I help with the bookkeeping." Of course he did. Camden continued. "Look, I know things got bad, but maybe this could be a turning point." Thessaly closed her eyes. The hope in his voice was familiar. Dangerous. "They want to have you for dinner," he said. "Just dinner. Talk. Nothing more." She should have said no. Instead, she asked, "When Sunday?" 6 o'clock. She hesitated. "Please," Tess Camden added. "It might mean a lot." She almost laughed. It meant everything. And that was the problem. That Sunday, she took the 2-hour drive south. The interstate stretched gray and endless beneath overcast skies. She gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, her shoulders aching by the time she pulled onto her parents' street. The house hadn't changed. Same beige siding, same red maple tree her father trimmed too neatly every fall. Same ceramic welcome sign her mother painted at a church class 20 years ago. Her chest tightened as she stepped onto the porch. Her father opened the door. He looked older, more gray, a little smaller somehow, but his expression was unreadable. "Thessaly," he said, as if stating a fact, not greeting a daughter. She stepped inside. The air smelled like pot roast and lemon cleaner. Her mother appeared in the hallway apron, crisp hair pulled back. "You look tired," she said. Thessaly didn't respond. Camden emerged from the dining room. He looked the same as ever, handsome, polished, freshly shaved. He gave her a quick half hug that felt like it belonged to someone else. Dinner was tense. They ate mostly in silence, interrupted only by Emma Camden's wife making small talk about the weather and local construction projects. Her voice was pleasant, but her eyes flicked nervously between family members like she was seated in the middle of a live wire. When dessert arrived, apple pie of course, her mother finally broke the silence. "So," Miriam said, slicing into the crust, "tell us about this house." Thessaly kept her voice neutral. "It's small, clean, 2 bedrooms. Quiet neighborhood." "And how much did it cost?" her father asked, lifting his coffee. $278, she said evenly. "I paid cash." The fork in her mother's hand stilled. Her father raised an eyebrow. "You managed that on your own." Thessaly nodded. "I've been saving for 12 years. Camden gave a short laugh. "Come on. You had to have help. Nobody saves that kind of money on just salary." Thessaly met his eyes. "Nobody in this family, maybe." His smile faded. Her mother set down her fork. "That's quite a sum to keep to yourself, considering where you came from." Thessaly leaned back in her chair. "I didn't take anything from anyone." "That's not how family works," her father said quietly. The words settled like a stone on the table. And suddenly she understood. This dinner wasn't a reunion. It was a warning. The pot roast cooled on the plates untouched now. The pie sat melting in its dish. No one reached for seconds. The air in the Crane dining room had shifted subtle at first, then unmistakable. The friendly tension of an estranged daughter returning home had transformed into something else. Something rehearsed. Thessaly sat with her spine straight, her hands folded calmly on her lap, even though her pulse pounded in her ears. She knew this game. She had once lived in this house like a guest in someone else's empire, tiptoeing through conversations that turned without warning. Tonight it wasn't turning, it had already turned. Her father cleared his throat again, softer this time. "You know," he began, voice measured, "we've always believed that family takes care of family, especially when one of us does well." Camden jumped in quickly as if on cue. "And you've done incredibly well, Tess. Really, nobody's denying that." Emma gave Camden a sideways glance, tight-lipped, uncertain, but said nothing. Thessaly said nothing either. She simply waited. She could feel it coming now like a train cresting the hill. "You've benefited," her mother said, tapping her finger against her coffee mug, "from everything you learned here, from the values we instilled, the structure we maintained. We taught you discipline, financial literacy, delayed gratification, and those things clearly served you," her father added. "So the question becomes, how do we all benefit from what you've built using those shared resources?" It was phrased like a puzzle, a philosophical dilemma, but it wasn't. It was a demand. Thessaly's stomach turned. Camden leaned forward slightly. "We're not saying, sell the house. Of course not. That's yours now. You earned it. But maybe we talk about some kind of contribution." "To the family fund," Miriam clarified. "As we've always done. Camden contributes. We contribute. Everyone gives what they can." Thessaly blinked once. Slowly. "I haven't been part of the family fund in over a decade, but you were raised in it," her mother countered. "You were built by it. I left at 21. "And who taught you how to budget?" her father asked. "Who showed you compound interest tables and made you track your spending?" "You did," she said, voice even. "Right after you opened a credit card in my name without telling me." Silence. Emma looked down into her lap. Camden's mouth opened, then closed. Her father didn't flinch. That was unfortunate. "But it doesn't change the principle. We are a shared value family. You were shaped by us. You succeeded because of us." "No," Thessaly said, her voice sharpening. "I succeeded in spite of you." The words landed hard. She felt them settle like a weight on the table, pressing into every crack of pretense. "You're being cruel," Miriam said quietly. "We opened our home to you. We're trying to reconnect, and you throw accusations like that." "You invited me here to ask for money," Thessaly replied. "That's not reconnection. That's strategy." Emma finally spoke. "Maybe we should," but her mother waved her off. "No. This is important. Do you know," Camden said, sitting back, "how much I've put into the fund over the years? 30% of my salary. Every year, since I started working. And now we're talking about buying a bigger place, starting a family, but we have to wait. Meanwhile, you've been stockpiling. For what? For a house no one gets to share." Thessaly turned to him. "You chose to give them 30%. I chose to keep mine and build a life." He scoffed. "You call that building a life alone in some fixer-upper with a broken porch swing. No partner, no family, just spreadsheets and quiet nights. That's not a life, Tess. That's hoarding in disguise." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't respond. She wasn't going to rise to that. Not tonight. Her father tried again, softening his tone. "We're not trying to punish you. We just think it's fair that you contribute now, that you give back to the system that gave to you. That's all we're asking." "I never agreed to that system," Thessaly said, her voice low. "You enforced it. You never asked. And when I said no, you punished me." "You walked out," Miriam snapped, "because you gave me no choice." And then, before she could say another word, her mother stood up. Her face was pale but tight with rage. "Don't rewrite history," Miriam hissed. "Don't come into this house with your condescension and your righteousness and pretend you didn't benefit from every rule we gave you. You think you're so independent. You think this house makes you better than us?" Thessaly stood too, but slowly, calmly. "I don't think I'm better," she said. "I think I'm finally free." And then it happened. A sharp, open-handed slap across her cheek. The sound echoed as if the house itself gasped. Thessaly didn't flinch. She simply blinked once and raised her hand to her face. The skin burned. Her eyes stung, but not from tears. From clarity. Camden stood abruptly. "Mom, what the hell?" But no one else moved. Even her father looked stunned. His hand twitched slightly on his coffee cup, but he didn't speak. Emma's mouth was covered by both hands, her eyes wide and glossy. Thessaly straightened her shoulders. She looked at her mother no longer as a parent, but as a person. A woman shaped by control, cloaked in tradition, wielding guilt like an heirloom blade. And then she stepped back from the table. "Thank you," she said softly, "for confirming what I always suspected." She turned toward the hallway. Behind her, Camden called out, "Tess, wait. Don't go like this." She paused at the door just long enough to look over her shoulder. "I offered you an olive branch," she said. "You turned it into a ledger." And she left. She didn't cry in the car, didn't scream or call Alicia or pull over to breathe. She drove all the way back to Minneapolis with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed gently to her cheek, feeling the imprint of her mother's final argument. She arrived home just past midnight. The porch light she'd replaced flickered once, then held steady. The house welcomed her back with stillness. She stepped inside, locked the door behind her, and stood for a moment in the dark, letting the silence settle around her like armor. When she flipped on the light, her phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. It was a photo of an envelope marked by a law firm in Cedar Rapids. No caption, just the image. Thessaly stared at it, unmoving. Then she sat down, slowly placed the phone face down on the table, and folded her hands once more in her lap. The trap hadn't been the dinner. The trap was just beginning. The roast was cold now. No one touched their plates. Steam no longer curled from the mashed potatoes, and the air in the dining room had thickened with tension so dense it muffled even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Thessaly sat perfectly upright in her chair, palms resting flat against her thighs. Her jaw was tight, but her voice remained level. "I earned every cent," she said, staring across the table at her father. "You never helped me!" Camden shoved his chair back. The legs scraped the hardwood with a shriek that startled even Miriam. "Are you serious?" he exploded. "You used everything we gave you and then pretended you built it all on your own. You betrayed us, Thessaly." Her gaze shifted toward him slowly. "I broke free from your control," she said, her voice still calm. "That's what you can't forgive." Camden's face turned red. "We gave you structure. We gave you discipline. You used our system to get ahead, and now you act like you owe nothing to the rest of us." "You didn't give me structure," she snapped. "You gave me fear. You monitored my checking account at 17. You called my college stipend a loan of honor and then pulled it the moment I challenged you." Her father's mouth opened, then closed again. Miriam's lips thinned. Emma, sitting at the far end, looked like she wanted to disappear into her sweater. Thessaly leaned forward, now hands clasped. "You think you taught me values. You taught me surveillance. You taught me that love comes with a ledger. That control is disguised as family duty. That sacrifice is demanded, not offered. Don't twist what we did for you," her father said, his voice low and warning. But Thessaly stood. "You didn't do it for me. You did it for the image of the family. You did it so you could say, 'Look how responsible she is, how independent, how stable,' and then take credit for my life while refusing to lift a finger once I left." Miriam rose too slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her tone was sharp. "We welcomed you back into this home. We invited you here with open hearts, hoping to rebuild something. And you're throwing it in our faces." "I didn't ask to come," Thessaly replied. "You sent a handwritten invitation to the house I bought on my own, and now you're angry I won't buy into your version of the past." "You're being cruel," Camden snapped. "You were always like this, cold, transactional, selfish." Thessaly's voice dropped. "And you were always too weak to question them." "You still are." Camden took a step forward, fists clenched, but it was Miriam who acted. She stepped around the table and slapped her daughter across the face. The sound rang out like the crack of a branch snapping in winter. Sharp, clear, undeniable. No one moved. Camden froze mid-breath. Emma gasped. Even their father looked stunned. Thessaly stood motionless, one hand rising slowly to her cheek. Her skin burned where the palm had landed. But she didn't step back, didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply looked at her mother. Not with hatred, not even with shock, but with something colder. Something final. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice unshaken for confirming what I already knew. She turned, walked to the sideboard where her bag rested and picked it up with calm precision. Camden started to speak, but her glance silenced him. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was liberation, the kind that doesn't need to be justified. "I won't be part of this again," she said softly. "Not this house. Not this system. Not your narrative." Her father stood now too, his voice half choked. "Tess, wait." She paused at the threshold of the dining room. "For what? Another guilt trip, a revised family agreement." She let out a breath. "You wanted control. You lost it. That's what all this is about. You're still our daughter." Miriam said, her voice shaking with either rage or something she would never name aloud. But Thessaly was already walking, through the hallway past the photos of Camden in his college cap and Emma in her homecoming dress. Her own pictures had been missing from those walls since the year she left. She remembered noticing that on a visit 5 years ago. Her mother had said they were being reorganized. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky was a wash of early evening gray and dry leaves skittered across the driveway. She climbed into her car without a word. No one followed. The engine turned over on the first try. She backed out slowly, not looking at the house, not checking the window to see who was watching. She didn't need to. She already knew. That night she slept little. Her cheek throbbed faintly, not from the force, but from the meaning behind it. A slap was not just about anger. It was about power. And that night, power had changed hands. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. It was thick, cream-colored, formal. From a law firm in Cedar Rapids she didn't recognize. No return address, just her name in block letters centered in the middle. She held it for a long moment before opening it, and when she did, her breath caught. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The envelope sat unopened on Thessaly's kitchen counter for nearly an hour. She'd brought it inside with her groceries, setting it between a sack of apples and a folded grocery list she had no memory of writing. But its presence pulsed. Legal-size cream-colored hand-delivered. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Still, when she finally sliced through the adhesive flap, her hands were steady. The lawsuit was 14 pages long. At the top, the Crane Family Fund versus Thessaly Crane, filed in Blackstone County Circuit Court. It accused her of misappropriating generational assets, a phrase that made her jaw tighten. The language inside was even more absurd. According to the suit, Thessaly had leveraged family-instilled knowledge values and collaborative investment culture to gain private wealth and had diverted ethical inheritance of responsibility into unilateral profit. They were suing her for being independent. She stared at the phrase unilateral profit for a full minute, trying to decide if it was satire or delusion. Maybe both. There were references to spreadsheets from her teenage years notes about how her early budgeting habits reflected family instruction, and even claims that her work ethic stemmed from Crane household doctrine. It was ludicrous. And it was dangerous. Because if they could make this sound convincing enough, they could bury her in court fees before any judgment was ever made. That night, she emailed Alicia the documents. She followed with a short message. "It's real. I need someone serious." By morning, Alicia had replied, "I know who you need. Her name's Arden Thorne. Don't let the bio scare you, she's brilliant. And she hates bullies." When Thessaly looked her up, Arden's law firm website was bare bones. No flashy graphics. Just a grayscale portrait of a woman with short hair, steel gray eyes, and the expression of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. A sidebar noted that Arden had grown up in the foster system and specialized in family litigation, particularly coercive inheritance structures and financial abuse. Thessaly scheduled a meeting. They met in a quiet office tucked behind an unassuming bakery. Arden didn't offer coffee. She offered a seat and got straight to business. "I read the suit twice," she said, flipping the pages. "It's academic poison dressed up as family values." Thessaly gave a small nod. "Can they win?" Not if we move fast and punch holes in the foundation before they can build a case? Arden leaned back, fingers steepled. We need evidence that you were never a consenting participant in this so-called fund. You have anything to show you were coerced, cut off financially, managed without input. Thessaly pulled out a manila folder, more than a decade of documentation, old emails, rent stubs, every tax return since I was 19. I kept it all. Arden's lips curved slightly. Good girl. She opened the folder, eyes scanning quickly. Hear this email. We expect a 12% tithe back into the fund once you secure stable income. That's not a suggestion. That's a directive. Thessaly's throat felt tight. That was from my mom. After I got my first contract role, I was making $38,000 a year. We'll use it, Arden said. And all of this. Over the next week, they assembled the war chest. Thessaly found pay stubs dating back to her first barista job, records of loan denials, utility bills, even a scanned screenshot of a call log from the day she was evicted at 19 for refusing to hand over her savings account PIN. Every artifact was a nail in the false story her family was building that she'd been nurtured, guided, given the same foundation as Camden. Alicia offered to write a sworn statement, too. She used to crash on my couch, Alicia told Arden during a Zoom call. She ate canned beans for a year. She skipped medication to pay for job applications. If she used family money, I never saw a cent of it. Arden's strategy was precise. She filed a counterclaim to dismiss the case, arguing coercive emotional debt was not legally binding. She cited 3 precedents, all involving adult children who had been manipulated into repayment obligations by family trusts. But even as the legal strategy firmed up, the emotional toll started to claw its way in. Thessaly stopped sleeping through the night. She'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slow above her. At 3 a.m., she'd get up and walk the perimeter of her house, hands tracing the walls, as if to reassure herself that yes, this home was still hers, that she wasn't crazy, that love shouldn't come with lawsuits. Her appetite vanished. Even her favorite rosemary crackers tasted like cardboard. Arden noticed during their third meeting. You're shrinking, she said bluntly. I'm fine. Thessaly lied. You're not, Arden said, flipping open a folder. But we're winning, and you'll hold. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Thessaly received 3 more letters from Camden, none handwritten, all legalistic. The last one said, "It's not too late to resolve this privately." She tossed it in the recycling bin without reading further. The anxiety hummed low and constant in her chest. She downloaded a white noise app just to drown out the buzzing in her ears. Sometimes at night, she replayed the moment of the slap, not for the violence but for the clarity that had followed. It had punctured every illusion, torn the veil, and in the strange silence that followed, she had finally seen her mother clearly, not as a guardian, but as a guard. One afternoon, after filing another affidavit, Arden asked, "Why didn't you go no contact?" Thessaly thought about it. "I think I wanted to believe they could change," she said. "Or that I could." Arden nodded. "That's how they win. They make you tie your healing to their behavior." Thessaly looked out the office window where a tree was shedding its last golden leaves. "Not anymore," she said. "I'm not waiting for permission to be done." And as they prepared for the hearing, Thessaly began to reclaim something deeper than her house. She was reclaiming her voice. And this time it came with evidence. The courthouse smelled like old paper and varnished wood. Thessaly sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3A, knees crossed, fingers laced tightly around a travel mug of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. Arden sat beside her legs, apart, chin-down eyes, scanning a final copy of their argument notes. Dressed in charcoal gray and armed with a leather satchel of meticulously tabbed evidence, she looked more like a surgeon preparing for a high-risk operation than an attorney. "They'll try emotional leverage first," Arden said without looking up. "Then legal ambiguity. Don't flinch. Don't fill silence. Let their absurdity land." Thessaly nodded, but her mouth was dry. When the bailiff called their case, she walked in behind Arden, pulse in her throat. On the left sat her parents, Camden, at their side. They looked polished and pitiful. Her father wore his Rotary Club tie. Miriam had a brooch Thessaly hadn't seen since Easter 2009. Camden's suit looked expensive tailored. He didn't glance her way. Their lawyer, a man in his late 50s named Peter Delling, rose and introduced the plaintiffs. His voice was warm, almost fatherly, as he began weaving a tale of family bonds, cooperative values, and intergenerational legacy. The Crane Family Fund, he said, was never a written agreement. It was a living system, one that raised children with shared tools, knowledge, and expectations. Ms. Crane was a beneficiary of this shared wealth and ethic, but instead of returning that investment, she isolated herself and reaped profits alone. We are not asking for punishment. We are asking for recognition, for fairness. Thessaly could feel the judge, an older woman named Honorable Patricia Yates, watching her over reading glasses. Dealing continued. My clients believe Ms. Crane's success financially and professionally was made possible through this family structure. That structure was not monetized, but it was real. And like any investment, it comes with responsibility. Arden stood slowly. No dramatics. Just clarity. Your Honor, we don't deny that Miss Crane learned values at home. Everyone does. But she was not part of any legally binding agreement. This case isn't about honoring a contract, it's about punishing autonomy. And we intend to prove that Miss Crane's success came despite her family's actions, not because of them. Then began the witness testimony. Camden was first. In the witness chair, he looked composed, like a man playing the role of the wounded brother. She always kept score, he said. She tracked every dollar, every favor. She didn't believe in the family model. She acted like she was a victim. And what did the family ask of her? Delling prompted. Just a fair share. When we contribute to the fund, it helps all of us. That's how we operate. Arden approached when it was her turn. Camden, she began. You said Thessaly benefited from family knowledge. Can you specify what knowledge Camden blinked? Well, budgeting, planning, our parents' work ethic. Did she receive any financial assistance after the age of 21? No. Was she listed on any joint family accounts after she moved out? No. Did she borrow money from the Crane Fund? No, but no further questions. Camden scowled. Next, Miriam took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described feeling erased from her daughter's life. She doesn't understand how hurtful it is to be shut out, she said, dabbing her eyes. We gave her everything we could. Arden didn't cross-examine her. She just let the words hang. When it was Thessaly's turn, she stood slowly. The courtroom quieted. I didn't run from family, she said. I ran from control. I never received a dime from the fund. I've paid rent since I was 17. I took out student loans. I couch-surfed. I ate instant oatmeal for dinner for 3 years. No one helped me. No one even asked. Delling rose. Ms. Crane, would you say your ambition comes from your upbringing? My survival instinct does. And would you agree that your budgeting skills reflect early household lessons? I would agree that living under surveillance taught me how to account for every penny. He smiled like he'd caught her. Then surely you must acknowledge that your financial success isn't entirely your own. Thessaly held his gaze. Then, by that logic, anyone who escapes a cage owes the warden rent. Gasps murmured behind her. Then Arden stood. We'd like to submit new evidence into the record, Your Honor. The judge gestured her forward. Arden held up a printed credit report. This document shows a credit card opened in Ms. Crane's name when she was 19 with her parents listed as joint users. The card was maxed out and unpaid. Ms. Crane never consented to this account. The courtroom rippled. Delling stood flustered. That's inadmissible without it certified and time-stamped, Arden said coolly. We also have email exchanges where Ms. Crane questioned the debt and was told by her mother that family finances are not individual matters. The judge nodded, admitted. Then Arden stepped closer. One final point, Your Honor. The plaintiffs claim Ms. Crane withheld wealth from the family, but financial records subpoenaed from Crane Fund's co-trustee show that it was depleted between 2015 and 2018 to pay off Camden Crane's personal debts. including $72,000 in private student loans and a failed restaurant venture in Kansas City. Camden went pale. Miriam gasped. "You told us that money was secure." Order Judge Yates snapped. Silence fell. Thessaly didn't turn around. She just stared straight ahead, breath-steady hands clasped in her lap. It was the first time in years she wasn't defending herself emotionally. Now, finally, they had to explain. As the hearing adjourned for deliberation, Arden leaned over and whispered, "That last part. They'll never recover from it." Thessaly gave the smallest nod. For the first time since the envelope arrived, she felt like she wasn't just fighting back, she was winning. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. No rustling papers, no hushed side conversations. Just the mechanical hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of a wooden bench as someone shifted. Thessaly sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Arden beside her, calm, unflinching, the leather file still shut. Across the aisle, Camden stared at the floor. Her father leaned back, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. Miriam's eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, no tissue in hand this time. Judge Yates entered, robe flowing behind her like a curtain drawn shut. Everyone rose. Then they sat. The judge cleared her throat. She adjusted her glasses. "This court has reviewed the submitted evidence, testimony, and legal arguments presented in Crane Family Fund versus Thessaly Crane. The central question before us was whether there existed any legally enforceable agreement, written or implied, requiring the defendant to return wealth to her family based on intangible contributions or shared values." She paused. No movement in the room. The answer is no. Thessaly didn't breathe. The court finds no documentation of such an agreement, no history of consistent financial support from the plaintiffs, and significant evidence suggesting the defendant's financial trajectory was independently earned. The idea of retroactively enforcing unspoken moral obligations, especially those tied to control, not care, is not supported by precedent. Miriam exhaled a soft whimper. Judge Yates continued, "Furthermore, this court does not recognize family-instilled values as a basis for financial liability. Nor do we condone systems of coerced allegiance masked as cooperative funding. The evidence of the fraudulent credit account and the diversion of Crane Fund assets toward other family members' debts only reinforces the court's position." She looked up. "Accordingly, this lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. And due to the emotional harm and financial burden placed on the defendant, the court orders the plaintiffs to pay all of Ms. Crane's legal fees effective immediately." Camden pushed back from the table. The scrape of the bench echoed harshly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. All this time she was playing the victim. Arden rose slowly. "Don't." Camden turned as if to speak again, then saw the judge still watching him. He shoved his chair in hard and stormed out through the side doors. Their father didn't move. Miriam opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at Thessaly. Really looked, and for the first time said nothing at all. The silence between them was louder than any accusation. Thessaly stood. She felt weightless, not because the burden had lifted, but because she'd finally stopped carrying it alone. As they exited the courtroom, Arden placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did it." Thessaly gave her a small, tight smile. "We did." They stepped into the sunlight outside. The sky was clear wind, cool against her face. She blinked into the brightness, the courthouse doors swinging shut behind her like the closing scene of a long, bitter chapter. There was no cheering, no grand celebration, just breath. For the first time in years, she could breathe without waiting for the next blow. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her house key, the smooth brass shape that had once felt like proof. Now it was something else entirely. It wasn't about ownership anymore. It was about sovereignty. And as she stepped off the courthouse steps, Thessaly knew one thing with complete clarity. She had nothing left to prove, only space left to live. The wind rolled softly through the front hedges, stirring the lavender blooms Thessaly had planted in March. Her porch light flicked on automatically, casting a warm halo over the red brick steps. Inside the house, the oven ticked as it cooled and low jazz played from a speaker tucked into the bookshelf. She had just finished hosting her first neighborhood potluck. 9 people had come. 2 couples from across the street, an elderly man who always walked his terrier past her fence, and a young mother named Eliza who'd recently moved in with her twins. They'd brought casseroles, salads, mismatched Tupperware, and stories. They didn't ask what she did for a living, or what her family was like. They just passed dishes and laughed about oven malfunctions and HOA notices. It had been simple, kind, real. Now, as she rinsed the last plate in the sink, she realized something remarkable. She wasn't tired, not in the way she used to be where exhaustion came from pretending. This was a gentle fatigue, the kind that followed peace, not survival. The lawsuit had been over for 5 months. Her parents hadn't spoken to her since the verdict. Camden had posted some cryptic quote on his LinkedIn about betrayal always coming from the inside, but otherwise disappeared from her life entirely. Thessaly had waited for grief to arrive, for the guilt that people like her, those conditioned to carry blame, were taught to expect. But it never came. Instead, something else had taken root. Slowly, patiently. Freedom. Not the explosive kind that came with declarations or slammed doors, but the steady kind. The kind that let her take a deep breath on her porch with a cup of tea and not flinch when a car pulled into her driveway. She sat down at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. Her podcast editing software blinked open. She had recorded 7 episodes already. Inheritance isn't ownership. The currency of control debt, disguised as duty, why no, is a complete sentence. She hadn't expected it to resonate the way it did, but inboxes had flooded with messages from strangers, some tearful, some relieved, many angry in ways they hadn't allowed themselves to be before. Tonight's episode would be different. She clicked, record. "My name is Thessaly Crane," she began. "And if you've been told you owe your family more than your truth, this episode is for you." She paused, steady. "A few months ago, my family took me to court for buying a house without including them. Not because they helped pay for it, but because they believed I belonged to them, that my success was their entitlement, that my choices were only valid if pre-approved." She inhaled slowly. "But here's what I've learned. Love doesn't require lawsuits. And boundaries don't mean betrayal. Sometimes the greatest inheritance you can give yourself is leaving the legacy that hurt you." She stopped recording. That was all she needed to say. The next morning, she received a message request on social media from Verity, a second cousin on her mother's side. They hadn't spoken since a family reunion when Thessaly was 17. The message was short. "I saw the court story. I think you did the right thing. If you ever want to talk, no pressure." Thessaly read it 3 times. Not because she doubted it, but because it was the first time someone from the inside had cracked the wall. She wrote back, "Thank you. Truly. I'm open to reconnecting, just not on old terms." The reply came a few hours later. "That's fair. I'd like to learn what the new terms are." She smiled. Maybe not all ties had to be cut. Maybe some could be rewoven wider, looser, with more oxygen between the threads. That spring, she joined the local gardening club. She learned how to propagate basil, how to use coffee grounds in compost, how to prune roses without rage. She hosted a second potluck. This time, 15 people showed up. Then, exactly 1 year after moving into her house, she threw what she called the house anniversary. A dozen of her new friends came. Some brought candles. One brought a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "This home is not shared by guilt." They ate under string lights in the backyard. Someone played acoustic guitar. Eliza's twins made a mess with bubbles. No one asked about lawsuits. No one used the word should. And when the night wound down and the plates were stacked and the laughter had faded into a low hum of stories and farewells, Thessaly stood on her back porch and looked at the house, the roofline, the porch swing, the flower beds she planted by herself. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was self-definition, a place she didn't have to earn or apologize for or defend. Just hers. Not because a court said so, because she did. She closed her eyes and whispered the truth she hadn't been able to say during the trial or even right after. The most valuable thing I own isn't the house. It's my freedom to say no and mean it. And under the soft evening sky, for the first time in her life, that freedom didn't feel like a rebellion. It felt like home.